Welcome to Warhammer General Tactics. In this video, we will discuss some strategies for the charge and pile-in moves.
General Tactics.
General Tactics is a series to not only share some tactics in Age of Sigmar and Warhammer 40k, but to point out the similarities in the two games, with the end goal of showing how much the two game systems mirror each other. In the first episode of the series, we went over screening units. Screening involves blocking incoming charges and pushing off enemy reserves. Model placement is really what separates a good player from an average player. Model placement can have more of an effect over a game than the most badass combo of overlapping aura buffs. Charging and the subsequent pile-in feel straightforward at first. To a new player, both will seem like there's no choices nor strategies involved in the moves. But that is not true. Charging and piling in can offer some very subtle tactical advantages. The rules for charging are fairly simple. Declare one or more targets in 12 inches to charge. Charge distances are determined by rolling 2d6. The first charging model moved must finish within half an inch from one of the target's models if you're playing Age of Sigmar, and 1 inch for 40k. So the first step is obviously declaring the unit's targets. In 40k, the player will have to worry about Overwatch. Overwatch allows the charge unit to fire their ranged weapons if they're not already in combat, but reduces the hit values to 6s. If the enemy doesn't pose a ranged threat, target away, but against armies with decent weapons, or worse, Tau and their supporting fire, a player will have to be a bit more specific on which enemies they target. There are a few ways to mitigate the threat from Overwatch. The first method is just charging from out of range of the ranged weapon, but this only works for very short ranged weapons. The more realistic way a player will avoid Overwatch is by charging from a position that is out of line of sight from the target. Charging from behind a wall or directly above or below the enemy can be used to keep some or all of them from shooting. Another way to avoid Overwatch but still get in combat with an enemy is to charge a nearby enemy and pile into the intended target. But we'll cover this in more detail in a bit. After the targets are declared and they fire their Overwatch, the charging unit rolls 2d6 and moves the first model so that it finishes within half an inch or 1 inch in AOS and 40k respectively. As long as the other models stay in coherency, they can use this move to go wherever they want. In 40k, the charging unit has the added stipulation that it cannot end its charge move within an inch of an enemy it did not target. If the player is charging a combat unit with a combat unit, likely they will just want to charge head-on and pile in normally. But in both systems, locking the opponent in combat, otherwise known as tagging, can limit their uses in the following turn. In this case, the intent is not necessarily to deal damage or destroy the enemy unit, but to engage them in combat. This may restrict the opponent by forcing them to retreat in the following turn. The charge move can be used to tag enemy units that they did not declare as a target, either because they were out of range or the threat of their Overwatch was too great. This can be achieved by spreading out the unit as it charges. The player may find it beneficial to move one of the models in the back the maximum charge distance towards the enemy first. Then, the other models are free to move about as long as they stay in coherency. The position of the models will obviously determine which enemy model is closest, and thus determine where they pile in. A unit can be daisy-chained from a charged unit to the intended target in order to lock them both in combat. This tactic can also be used to make up for a short charge roll. The charge move can also be used to move through a loosely formed screening unit. In AOS, this is a bit harder to pull off, but at 40k, unit coherency is 2 inches, meaning small models can fit between them if the screen is stretched to its limits. Again, the charging unit will move one of the models furthest back first, then move the rest of the models past the screening unit. After charges are completed, the real combat begins. Each unit is activated and then had the opportunity to pile in and attack. Pile in is a 3-inch move towards the closest enemy model as long as the unit is within 3 inches of an enemy or charge this turn. 40k again has another bit to this rule. In 40k, models get another 3 inches just like a pile-in after finishing their attacks. This move is called consolidating. It's worth noting that through careful pile-in moves, the closest enemy model at the beginning of the move may not be the closest enemy model at the end of the move. With this, it's possible to leapfrog around an enemy unit, either to surround them, get more models in combat range, or to reach other targets. In Warhammer 40k, when a unit is tagged, generally speaking, it won't be able to shoot next turn, whether it retreats or stays in combat. This also means that your models in combat cannot be targeted by enemy shooting either. If you charge your unit into a target that will either obviously fall back or quickly die, leaving your charging unit exposed to enemy shooting, there is a way to ensure safety. This will require either terrain that is blocking the enemy or a somewhat large unit, depending on the target's size. Simply charge into the enemy, surrounding it, but leaving most of the models out of combat range. If the model is properly surrounded, it won't be able to retreat next turn, and in the enemy's following turn, the rest of the unit piles in and finishes the target off, ready to act normally in your following turn. Note that while a model in a unit isn't forced to pile in, it is forced to attack if it is in range, so you can't completely engulf your target and then choose not to swing. If you suspect your opponent is going to try one of these sneaky pile-in maneuvers, there are a few ways to avoid it. If you can activate the unit ahead of the enemies, pile into base contact, and lock them in place, you can potentially stop them in their tracks. In 40k, if you see this coming, it may be worth it to use a combat offensive stratagem to pile in and lock the enemy in base contact. Another way to defend from these pile-ins is to pull casualties in a way that pulls the enemy out of 3 inches or into an undesired target. This obviously means your unit is being charged by multiple enemy units. Pull casualties all from right in front of your opponent's models that have yet to activate. If they charge, they will still be able to pile in, but if you can create a gap big enough, you can either keep them out of range or force them to pile into another unit you have nearby. There are a few armies and units that contain ways to boost this ability, and it often makes for a powerful augment. The Fyreslayers faction has quite a few ways to enhance pile-in moves, and units like Hormagaunts and Yetis can perform a 6-inch pile-in move. These abilities may not seem great on paper, but these are powerful enhancements that can really increase the unit's reach, whether it be to get more models in combat, tag more enemy units, or surround their targets. These abilities will prove quite useful. Another method of increasing the effects of pile-in is also by doing it twice. There are plenty of spells, abilities, battalions, and stratagems that allow units to pile in and attack twice. Not only can this be used to increase damage, it can be used to grab even more targets. If used in tandem with another unit, it can be used to effectively move right past screening units. Say an opponent is blocking an important unit with screening models. Declare a charge against the screen as well as the unit behind it, and charge the screening models with another unit that will wipe them out in one combat phase. Activate the second unit first, destroy the screen, then activate the other unit twice, hopefully moving far enough to get in combat with the unit previously screened. This can obviously be used even without activating twice, but the intended target would have to be pretty close to their screen. Model placement is so situational. It's hard to think of all the different ways to use charging and piling in to your advantage. Hopefully, this added a few tools to your arsenal, but what else can you add? I always like to hear your strategies. What other topics would you like to see covered in this series? The topics can be about both game systems or just one or the other. Leave your thoughts in the comments section below. The channel also reviews other tactics for 40k and AOS units and armies, so be sure to check out the other content as well. As always, thanks for watching.